Hey guys, this is Alex Divison, and this is the second video in a series of videos detailing the neighborhood amenities feature. Now, in the last video we went over what essentially the neighborhood amenities feature was, and I introduced the various parts of it and also the basic code and functionality. In this feature I'll be doing more of a user guide and going over what you need to actually know to actually implement further functionality to this feature in future stories and make this neighborhood amenities feature more robust. Now, if you have any questions about this video, please feel free to contact me. I'll be displaying my contact info at the end of the video. And if you have any questions whatsoever about the project as a whole, please feel free to contact Professor Masood Sajadi, who is acting as both the product owner and mentor for the BreazeHome 4.0 project. Okay, so currently we're on the BreazeHome development virtual machine, and I'll be going over various parts of the feature that as a developer you should be familiar with if you want to create further features for the neighborhood amenities and expand on what's already been created. Now, one of the central parts of this feature is the map and the actual amenity categories. Now, we never went over in the previous video where these categories were stored, but they are stored in the dictionaries as a JSON file right over here. If you open it, you can see all the categories over here. Now, it's important to note that whenever you're sending this info to the back end to actually return a list of amenities, we want to send the alias variable back. Okay. The Yelp API differentiates between various amenity categories by the alias. And if you actually look here, various categories actually have parents. So right here you see that this alias is 3D printing. So if I were to actually send this category to the Yelp service API, I would get a list of various 3D printing stores around the property. Now, this parent over here, if I were to send this to the Yelp API, not only would I get various amenities that have to deal with 3D printing, I would also get various amenities that are also children of the local services category. Okay, so this is very useful for actually structuring how you want to create various calls to the BreazeHome backend. Okay, so that's basically how the Yelp categories work. So when in the future you want to work with these categories, that's how it works. You want to send the alias because that's what the Yelp API will actually recognize, and the parent is actually the parent of whatever category you're looking at. So moving on, the next central portion of the neighborhood amenities feature is actually the that maps itself. Now, the maps were already created. The map service is already created in the previous version of BreazeHome, but as you work with this feature in the future, chances are you're going to be expanding on the map service and adding new functions. And one such function I've already introduced in the previous video, which was encompass points, which actually resized the map and always ensured that the various markers are on the map. That was a function that I had added on to the map service. So right here you can see the map service. Here's the previous function I was talking about over here. And various important and useful functions that you're going to probably be using a lot are the zoom map, the move map to, and very infrequently you might use the get map bounds just so you get what the bounds of the current map is. But for the most part, you're going to be using these three functions a lot, unless you want to create your own function. Okay. So they're pretty self-explanatory. The move map, all it does is it just pans the current map that you send to the function right over here to whatever longitude and latitude points are sent, right? And the position is right over here. Right, this position variable is actually a array of longitude and latitude points. The zoom map, self-explanatory as well. It just changes the zoom of the current map that you're on. Now, besides the map service, there are other things that you should know as the user before you actually start working with the neighborhood amenities feature. One of which is the fact that the Yelp API seems to have an issue with their search radius. Now, if you remember before, I had preset the radius to whenever I searched for various amenities to 1,200 meters right over here. This number isn't very exact, it seems, because you sometimes will get amenities that are farther than 1,200 meters away, because 1,200 meters is like 0.7 miles, right? So all your amenities should be within 0.7 miles of your property of interest. But I've contacted Yelp, and I've seen other people also put complaints about how the radius function doesn't seem to be working, and they acknowledge that it's not working as well. They've been able to replicate the mistakes and bugs in the radius function, but it's not working. So as a user and a future developer, if you ever decide to actually work with the neighborhood amenities feature, be warned that the radius is a bit tricky. Furthermore, when we're talking about a map, there is sometimes an issue with the moving and zooming when you're doing them both at the same time, that seems to alter the leaflet map, and I don't know what happens to leaflet map, but it seems to actually not quite break it, but you get results that you don't expect. Alright, you expect to set your zoom to a certain zoom, and you expect to be panned to a certain section, but when you do both at the same time, there are times when it just doesn't happen. Alright, I found that the best way to get around that was to actually just use a fit bounds method over here, where you just give it bounds to fit the map to, and that seems to solve the issue of shifting and zooming at the same time. Now, sometimes the shifting and zooming works, sometimes it doesn't. It seems to be an issue with the map service. So as a developer, just be forewarned of that. Now, when you're developing for this feature, you're going to want to also make sure that when you are in the HTML over here, and you are in the neighborhood amenities section, all the amenity categories are on the page, right? We've already shown that right over here. We've already shown that all the amenity categories are on the page, and you can go through them all. Like, there's just a bunch of them. Now, each of these categories has a div that's been collapsed. And what you may run into the issue with, and that's something that I've seen, is that when you call a function, let's say amenity click, right over here, where you have this ng repeat, right? This is this huge. You're just basically repeating all of these, every single amenity type in that category JSON file that I showed you. When you click on a specific category, what's actually happening is that it's actually, even though it may only uncollapse what you clicked, it's actually processing data in every single one of those collapsed divs and populating them with data. And this can create huge hang-up times unless you put something such as ngIf, right? Where you tell it that you only want it to do this function if so on and so forth, right? So this is just a heads up when you're developing for this feature and in other features, to make sure that when you're using ng repeat and you are applying a function to it, that even though you think that the function is only being applied to one of the various divs, in this case, let's say this div was the, I don't know, restaurants div. Sure, that restaurants div will uncollapse, but at the same time, in each one of those collapsed divs, it's gonna start trying to create all of these little, list every single amenity in there. So be warned to apply ngIfs whenever you're dealing with ng repeat, so you don't have a hang-up issue. All right. You may not notice it for certain functions if you only have a couple of things in your ng repeat, but in this case there's over 1,000 categories, so the hang time builds up really quickly, so be forewarned. And that concludes the guide for developers for the neighborhood amenities feature. Now for general users, there's no coding or implementation of new functionality required. You're just trying to actually use the neighborhood amenities feature, and it's very straightforward. All you have to do is, when you see a property of interest, select the property, and once you've actually reached that property, what's going to happen is that the longitude and latitude values are going to be sent to the back end, and whenever we click on any one of these amenity types, say active life, we get the relevant data. Alright, so right now I can see this list of various amenities around my property of interest. Let's say I'm interested in this over here, map zooms. And let's say I'm also interested in, I don't know, true martial arts as well, and I don't know, the gymnastics center. So here I can actually see now the various markers with respect to my property, and I can see, okay, 14 is closest, and that was the gymnastics center. And it makes it easier to see when they're highlighted when you click on them. And if I want to know more about these various amenities, I can just toggle to the list and see the address, any ratings, and looks like this gymnastics center has pretty low rating, even though it's only one. And I can also click on the link, so I'm taken to the Yelp page. Right, and it's that simple. If I want to remove something from a list, I simply click it again, and it's removed from the list. And it's also removed from the map view as well. It's very simple to use the feature for general users. And that's essentially it. Now, if you select a amenity that does not have any amenity type doesn't have any amenities there. Let's say I select adoption services. There are no adoption services around. I'm going to get an empty list, and I'm not going to see any markers here. Alright. And that's essentially the guide on how users should use the neighborhood amenities feature for the BreazeHome 4.0. Okay, and that just about wraps up the developer's guide and user guide for the neighborhood amenities feature. In the developer's guide, we went over various topics and pieces of information that a developer would need to know to implement further functionality for the neighborhood amenities feature. And in the general user guide, we went over how users should utilize the neighborhood amenities feature to achieve the maximum results. Now, if you have any questions whatsoever about this video, please feel free to contact me at my email listed right here. You can also contact me at my LinkedIn account right here, which also contains various forms of contact info. Now, if you have any questions whatsoever with regard to the BreazeHome 4.0 project as a whole, please feel free to contact Professor Masood Shajati, and his email is listed right here.